Morning my nephew showed up with a moving truck. I was in the middle of making coffee. Not a small truck either. One of those orange U-Haul 16-footers backed halfway up my driveway like he owned the place. Which, as he was about to tell me, he believed he did. I stood at the kitchen window with my mug, watching him climb out of the cab in that blazer he always wore to look important. His wife Sandra got out the passenger side, arms crossed, already impatient. Two men I didn't recognize jumped out the back and started unfolding a loading ramp. I set down my coffee and opened the front door. "Uncle Ray," my nephew said, spreading his hands like he was greeting me at a party. "We need to talk." Behind him, Sandra pulled out her phone and started filming. I looked at the loading ramp. I looked at the two men waiting beside it. I looked at my nephew's face, which had the particular brightness of someone who has been rehearsing a moment for a long time. "Connor," I said, "who authorized the transfer of his property?" His smile didn't fall. It just stopped working. His eyes went somewhere else for a second, and in that second I knew everything I needed to know. My name is Raymond Kowalski. I'm 64 years old, and for 26 years I worked as a senior examiner for the Internal Revenue Service, Criminal Investigation Division. My job was finding the money people tried to hide. Offshore accounts, shell companies, falsified depreciation schedules, fraudulent charitable trusts. If someone built a financial structure designed to deceive, I was the one who took it apart. I retired 3 years ago to my house in Flagstaff, Arizona, the one I bought in 1998 and paid off in 2017. 4 bedrooms, a workshop, 2 acres of ponderosa pine, worth somewhere around $640,000 in the current market. Connor is my late sister's son. Patricia died of ovarian cancer 11 years ago when Connor was 22. After that, I became the closest thing to a parent he had left. I paid for his last year of graduate school. I co-signed his first car loan. When he and Sandra got married, I hosted the rehearsal dinner at my house. I thought we had something real. I should back up. 4 months before the moving truck showed up, Connor started calling more often. Not unusual on its own. But the calls had a texture to them I recognized without quite naming. He asked about my health. He asked whether I found the house too big for one person. He mentioned property values in Flagstaff had really taken off, hadn't they? He said the guest room was just sitting empty most of the year, wasn't it? His voice had the smooth, careful quality of someone moving through a prepared list of questions. The visit started 6 weeks after the calls. He and Sandra would drive up from Phoenix on weekends bringing coffee and groceries. Sandra would wander the rooms with a measuring look I'd seen before on people who are mentally placing furniture. Connor would sit at my kitchen table asking about my retirement accounts, whether I had a financial advisor, whether I'd updated my estate documents lately. I answered vaguely. I was watching. The second visit, he brought paperwork. He said a friend of his had become an estate planning consultant and had put together some documents that could protect me from probate and simplify everything for my beneficiaries. He had a whole folder of forms. He fanned them out on the table the way salespeople do, creating a sense of volume that discourages careful reading. I looked at each one. They were what he said they were. Beneficiary designation updates, a basic durable power of attorney for healthcare. I signed the healthcare POA because that one was genuinely something I'd been meaning to do, and I signed it fully aware of what I was doing. Connor barely concealed his disappointment that I read every page. The third visit, Sandra wasn't with him. He came alone and was quieter, more careful. He said he was worried about me living alone at altitude, and that he and Sandra had talked about it, and they wanted me to know I could always come stay with them in Phoenix if I ever felt the winters were getting to be too much. I told him I'd been living in Flagstaff for 25 years in the altitude, and I had come to an understanding. He laughed. Then he said, almost as an afterthought, that he had one more form, just a property continuity document his consultant had recommended, something about avoiding delays if anything ever happened to me. He slid it across the table without looking at me. I picked it up and read it. It was a warranty deed, transferring 1142 Crestwood Drive, Flagstaff, Arizona, to Connor James Valetti and Sandra Lynn Valetti. I set it down. I looked at my nephew. He was looking at his phone. "I'll need to have my attorney review this," I said. He nodded, still looking at the phone. Of course, no rush." There was every rush. I could see it in the way his jaw tightened when I said attorney. I did not call an attorney that week. I called a woman named Elaine Cho. Elaine had been a forensic accountant with the FBI for 18 years before going private. I'd worked alongside her on 2 cases during my last years at the IRS. She was meticulous, relentless, and she had a gift for finding the structure beneath the structure, the real shape of what someone was building when they thought no one was paying attention. I told her what had happened. She was quiet for a moment. "Send me everything he's had you sign," she said, "and anything else with his name on it from the past year." I scanned and sent the healthcare POA, the beneficiary forms, and a screenshot of the warranty deed he'd left behind, which I had photographed before handing back to him. 2 days later, she called me back. "The healthcare POA is clean," she said. "Exactly what it says it is." But I pulled Connor's financials. He has a private lending company registered in Delaware, Valetti Capital Partners. On paper, it looks like a small real estate investment firm. But the numbers don't add up. He's taken in around $380,000 from private investors over the past 2 years. The returns he's promised are not realistic. There are no actual property transactions I can find to support the kind of returns he's been advertising. She paused. "Uncle Ray, your nephew is running a fraud." I sat with that for a while after I hung up. I'd spent 26 years at the IRS chasing people who built complicated lies around other people's money. I'd seen ministers do it. I had seen physicians do it. I had seen people who coach Little League on Saturday morning and on Monday afternoon were forging loan documents. I had never seen my sister's child do it. The next 2 weeks I ran my own quiet audit. Connor had put me on a mailing list for Valetti Capital Partners at some point without asking. The emails promised 12% annual returns on short-term real estate bridge loans. They were written with the kind of professional confidence that non-specialists find reassuring and specialists find immediately suspicious. The disclaimers were buried and vague. I contacted 3 people Elaine had identified as investors. I introduced myself as a family friend doing some due diligence. All 3 confirmed they had invested. None of them had received a single return payment on schedule. Connor had told each of them there were temporary processing delays due to banking transitions. The banking transitions were, of course, not real. Connor needed my house because he needed cash, and he needed it fast. A property worth $640,000, sold quickly below market, would cover the bulk of what he owed and buy him time to either run or reset. I was just the most convenient asset in his life, packaged in 30 years of family feeling. I called my attorney, a woman named Deborah Reese who had handled my estate planning for a decade. I told her everything. She was quiet in a specific way that meant she was already thinking 3 steps ahead. "He never got you to sign the warranty deed?" she confirmed. "No." "Good. Then we start there." She paused. "Ray, given what your investigator found about the investment scheme, this isn't just a family matter. The SEC and possibly the FBI will want to know about this." "I know," I said. "Do you want to pursue that?" I thought about the 3 investors I'd spoken to. A retired schoolteacher from Scottsdale who had put in $40,000, a couple in their 50s from Mesa who had invested $65,000 of their retirement savings, a man named George Farrow who ran an auto repair shop in Tempe and had put in $22,000, money he told me he had originally saved to expand his shop. "Yes," I said, "all of it." Before any of that could move forward, Connor showed up with the moving truck. I don't know what he expected. Maybe he thought 3 weeks of silence from me meant I had caved, that I was ready to make this easy for him. Maybe he had convinced himself the unsigned warranty deed didn't matter, that some other document in that folder I'd signed gave him an angle. People who commit fraud develop a particular kind of self-convincing. They stop being able to tell what's real. I stood in my doorway. I watched him walk toward me. "Connor," I said, "who authorized the transfer of this property?" "Uncle Ray, I think there's been a miscommunication. The warranty deed I did not sign or a different document." He stopped walking. Sandra had stopped filming. The 2 hired men were very still beside the truck. "We have paperwork," he said. His voice had changed register. Lower. Careful. "Show me." He opened his briefcase and handed me a document. I looked at it for about 45 seconds. It was a quitclaim deed, dated 6 weeks prior. My signature was on it, or something that looked like my signature. The notary stamp was from an office in Scottsdale. I had 3 immediate observations. First, the date. 6 weeks ago, I was in Albuquerque attending a conference for retired federal investigators. I had a hotel receipt, a conference badge, and photographs from 2 dinners with former colleagues to confirm exactly where I was. I was not in Flagstaff. I was not in Scottsdale. I did not sign anything on that date. Second, the notary. I knew every notary I had ever used in Flagstaff. This name Angela Breeze was not one of them. I had never been to that Scottsdale office. Third, the signature itself. I have a specific way of writing the K in Kowalski. I developed it in my 20s from a deliberate modification after a professor told me my natural K was too similar to my R. For 40 years, I've crossed the top arm of the K with a short downward hook, like a fish hook. It's distinctive enough that I use it as a private marker on any document that matters to me. It cannot be replicated without knowing it's there. The signature on that quitclaim deed did not have the hook. I looked up at Connor. "I want you to take your truck and the people you brought with it," I said, "and leave my property." "Uncle Ray, I was in Albuquerque the day this document is dated. You can verify that with the conference registration, my hotel reservation, and approximately 40 people who saw me there. The signature is forged. The notarization is fraudulent. And I am going to give you exactly one opportunity to drive away from here before I make the next call." Sandra stepped forward. "You're being paranoid. We have a legal document." "Sandra," I said, "I spent 26 years at the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. I have made 12 federal referrals that resulted in convictions. Paranoid is not a word that applies to me professionally or personally." I looked at Connor. Last chance. He stood there for another few seconds. Then something in him deflated. He closed his briefcase. He walked back to the truck without looking at me. Sandra followed. The 2 hired men broke down the ramp in silence and loaded it back in. I watched the truck back out of my driveway and went inside and called Deborah. Her response was immediate. "I'll file for an emergency injunction on the property today. Nothing moves. And I'm calling the Coconino County Sheriff's Office to report the fraudulent instrument." By evening, 2 things had happened. The property was legally frozen by emergency order, and a detective from the Sheriff's Financial Crimes Unit had called me to schedule an interview for the following morning. His name was Detective Paul Ashburn. He was methodical, asked good questions, and had clearly seen quitclaim deed fraud before. I gave him everything: the timeline of Connor's visits, the warranty deed Connor had tried to get me to sign, the forged quitclaim deed with my fabricated signature, and a copy of Elaine's preliminary financial report on Valetti Capital Partners. He looked at the report for a long time. "This investment scheme," he said. "You have investor contacts?" 3 confirmed. I have names and amounts. Elaine can provide a more complete picture with another week of access. He nodded slowly. "I'm going to need to make some calls." 3 days later, the Arizona Corporation Commission opened a formal investigation into Valetti Capital Partners. Elaine, working now as a formal consultant to both my civil case and the state investigation, identified 7 investors total. Combined losses exceeded $380,000. Meanwhile, Deborah was building the civil case around the forged deed. She retained a document examiner, a man named Stephen Greer, who had spent 30 years doing forensic analysis for federal courts. His findings were unambiguous. The signature was a forgery. The pressure of the pen strokes, the angle of approach, the specific formation of letters all indicated someone copying from a reference sample rather than signing naturally. And critically, the fishhook K was absent. In its place was a standard angular K that matched no authenticated sample of my signature from the past 4 decades. Greer also flagged the notarization. Angela Breeze, the notary whose stamp appeared on the deed, had her office contact Deborah's firm within 24 hours of being reached. She confirmed she had notarized a document for Connor that day, but it was a vehicle title transfer, not a quitclaim deed. Her stamp and the date were real. The document underneath them was not. Someone had scanned her legitimate notarization, isolated the stamp, and applied it digitally to the fraudulent deed. It was not a sophisticated technique, but it didn't need to be. Most people don't look that closely. I looked that closely. Connor retained an attorney, a man from Phoenix named Brett Lassen, who had the particular aggressive energy of someone being paid to seem confident about a weak position. Lassen sent Deborah a letter suggesting that my advanced age and possible cognitive decline might explain my failure to remember signing documents, and that my hostile attitude toward my nephew indicated a family dispute that had been inappropriately escalated to legal channels. I had expected this. It was the same move Ryder would have made in my shoes. Paint the plaintiff as confused. Make the court hesitant. Deborah responded by submitting my Albuquerque conference records, hotel reservation, 12 witness statements from attendees who had spoken with me that day, and a note from Greer confirming that the signature deviation was not consistent with any age-related change in fine motor control. It was consistent with forgery. She also submitted, with my permission, a copy of my performance reviews from my last 5 years at the IRS, which documented no cognitive concerns of any kind, and my tax filings from the past 3 years, which were, as you might expect from someone who spent a career at the Criminal Investigation Division, meticulous. The cognitive decline argument died quietly. While the legal cases moved forward, Elaine continued pulling on threads. She called me on a Tuesday evening, and I could tell from the way she opened the conversation that she had found something. "There's a third party," she said. She had traced a series of payments from Valetti Capital Partners' operating account to a financial consulting firm in Nevada called Pathway Resource Group. 12 payments over 18 months, totaling $63,000. Pathway Resource Group had one principal, a man named David Court. Elaine pulled Court's professional history. He had been a licensed financial advisor until 2019, when he had surrendered his license in lieu of revocation following a client complaint investigation. Since then, he had operated as a family wealth transition consultant, a term with no regulatory definition, serving clients who wanted advice on restructuring assets within family systems. I read between those lines without difficulty. Court was teaching people how to take money from their families. She had found email exchanges between Connor and Corte, obtained legally through the Arizona Corporation Commission investigation subpoena power. The emails were methodical. Corte had advised Connor on how to approach me, what documents to get me to sign first, to establish a pattern of compliance, how to frame the warranty deed as routine, and how to construct the forged quitclaim deed using a legitimate notary stamp as cover. He had even reviewed the signature forgery and suggested the forger needed to practice the K more. The forger had not known about the hook. Corte became a separate defendant in both the state investigation and a federal referral. Elaine and I both wrote detailed statements for the referring agent. I had made federal referrals from the other side of the table many times. It was strange to be the one providing the underlying facts. The main hearing was scheduled on a Wednesday in April, held in Coconino County Superior Court. I wore the same gray suit I'd worn to every significant professional event of my career. I'm not superstitious, but I believe in continuity. Some habits carry weight. Connor and Sandra arrived with Lassen, who had dressed carefully and wore the expression of someone who had reviewed his strategy overnight and was less certain of it than he had been the day before. Sandra sat very straight and did not look at me. Connor looked at me once when they entered, and then looked at the floor. Judge Evelyn Park was 61, had been on the bench for 14 years, and had previously worked as a civil rights attorney. Her reputation was for exactness. She didn't tolerate waste, and she had a specific impatience for arguments built on misdirection. Lassen presented first. He had abandoned the cognitive decline angle and shifted to a claim that I'd signed the quitclaim deed during one of the visits, in the context of estate planning, and had simply failed to retain the memory of doing so due to the stress and volume of paperwork involved. He produced 2 witnesses, both social acquaintances of Connor's, who claimed to have been present when I allegedly signed documents at Connor's home in Phoenix. I had never been to Connor's home in Phoenix. I had been invited twice and declined both times due to scheduling conflicts. I had the text message exchanges to confirm it. Deborah presented them. She also presented the full forensic analysis, the notary's sworn affidavit, the conference records, the 12 witness statements, and Elaine's complete financial report on Valetti Capital Partners. Then came the emails. Deborah read 3 excerpts aloud. The first was Corte advising Connor on how to structure the approach, get the healthcare POA first, something legitimate, establish a pattern where the subject is accustomed to signing. The second was Corte reviewing the forged signature and noting the K needed more work. The third was an exchange from 2 weeks before the moving truck appeared. Connor writing to Corte, He hasn't signed the warranty deed, and I think he's suspicious. Cortav responding, use the forged instrument. Just move in. By the time he gets legal representation, the sale can be complete. The courtroom was very quiet after that. Judge Park looked at Lassen. She had the expression of someone who had been handed a document and found it even worse than described. Lassen said his clients would need time to respond to this new evidence. Judge Park said the evidence had been filed with the court 5 days prior in full compliance with disclosure rules and that Lassen had had ample time to respond. She also said that what she was looking at appeared to constitute not a family misunderstanding but a deliberate criminal conspiracy with professional facilitation, and that she was referring all materials to the Coconino County Attorney's Office for criminal prosecution immediately. She invalidated the quitclaim deed. She entered a permanent injunction preventing any attempted transfer of the property. She awarded me attorney's fees. Connor and Sandra were still in the building when the detectives found them. I watched them led out of the courthouse. Sandra was crying. Connor walked with his head down, one hand raised as if he might say something, and then he didn't. I had known this moment was coming for 2 months. I had prepared for it, strategized for it, built a legal structure around it, brick by brick. And yet, standing there in the courthouse hallway watching my sister's son in handcuffs, I felt none of the satisfaction I had expected. Just a quiet, heavy sadness for Patricia, who had loved him so much, and who would not have been able to understand how he had become this. The sentencing came 11 weeks later. Connor received 3 years in state prison for forgery and fraud, plus a mandatory restitution order of $380,000 to Valetti Capital Partners investors, to be paid from the proceeds of any assets he held. His attorney negotiated a concurrent sentence for the investment fraud charges after Connor cooperated with investigators on the Cortec case. Sandra received 18 months probation and 300 hours of community service. She had not, the court found, been involved in the document forgery itself. She had known about Valetti Capital Partners, but the evidence of her direct participation was insufficient for criminal charges. She cooperated fully. David Corte was a different matter. The combination of the Arizona state charges and the federal referral resulted in a 14-count indictment. He had been running his consulting operation for 6 years and had advised on at least 11 similar schemes involving family members. He was looking at a decade, minimum. His Nevada firm was dissolved by regulators within 30 days of the indictment. George Farrow, the man who ran the auto repair shop in Tempe, called me after the sentencing. He had gotten my number from Elaine. He had heard the restitution order was large enough that investors might see partial recovery. I don't know if I'll ever get the money back, he said, but I wanted to thank you for not letting it go. A lot of people would have. Family being involved in all. I told him the truth, which was that it had not been easy, that I'd sat with the decision for a long time before I committed to seeing it through completely. That there was a version of this where I got my house back and called it done, and I had considered it. What made you go further? He asked. I thought about Patricia, about the 7-year-old version of Connor who used to follow me around my workshop asking what everything was for, about the fact that the person who had done this had been mentored into it by a professional predator who had done it 11 times before to 11 other families, most of whom had probably decided it was too painful to pursue. Because stopping at the edge doesn't stop anything, I said. He was quiet. Then, well, thank you anyway, Mr. Kowalski. The spring after the sentencing, I received a letter. No return address, but the postmark was from the Women's Correctional Facility in Goodyear, a name I did not expect to see. Sandra had written to me. It was 3 pages. She talked about the choices she had made and the ones she had rationalized, and the point at which she had stopped asking questions about Valetti Capital Partners because she already knew the answers would be uncomfortable. She said she had told herself it would be fine, that the investors would be paid eventually, that the house situation was more complicated than it looked from the outside. She said she understood now that these were not beliefs, but decisions. She did not ask for forgiveness. She said she knew she didn't have the right to ask. I read it twice. I set it on my desk. I haven't answered it yet. I'm not certain what I would say. There is a version of an answer that is true and fair, and I haven't found the right words for it. The Victorian writing desk in the video. I don't have one of those. What I have is a 1940s machinist's workbench I've been refinishing in the workshop. Solid maple under 50 years of grime and 2 colors of paint. My father used to have one like it in his garage. I bought this one at an estate sale in 2019 thinking I'd fix it up that first winter and never got around to it. I got around to it this past winter. There's something clarifying about physical work when everything else has been argument and documents and phone calls. You know what you're doing. The sandpaper works or it doesn't. The stain either raises the grain or it doesn't. The outcome is entirely dependent on whether you did the thing correctly, and there is no version of good work that looks like bad work. I finished the bench the week the sentencing came down. It stands in the corner of my workshop, and it's the nicest piece of furniture in the house. I think about Connor sometimes, mostly early in the morning when I'm drinking coffee by the window. Not about what he did. I understand what he did in a structural sense as well as anyone alive. I think about the person he was before, the one who used to call me when he was having a hard time, who brought Patricia's old photographs to me after she died because he said they felt safer with me. That person made choices, a sequence of small choices that led to a large one. A professional predator found him when he was financially desperate and gave him permission to stop feeling bad about it. That's how it usually works. I spent 26 years understanding how people convince themselves that what they're doing is acceptable. It never gets less sad. My house is mine. My workshop is mine. The 2 acres of ponderosa pine are mine. And in the mornings, the light comes through those trees at an angle that still makes me stop sometimes. That's not a small thing. Some people lose it and never get it back. Justice, in my experience, is not a feeling. It's a structure. It holds when you build it right, when you use the right materials, when you don't cut corners because the process is slow or uncomfortable. I spent a career building it for other people. It turns out the same principles apply when you're building it for yourself. I picked up the sandpaper and kept working. I've thought a lot about the moment Connor's face changed. Not in the courtroom, not when the detectives put the handcuffs on him. Earlier than that. It was standing at the end of my driveway, briefcase in hand, when he understood that I had seen what he built, and I had already taken it apart. That moment didn't feel like victory. It felt like the end of something that had been dying for a long time without me admitting it. People ask me sometimes whether I regret pursuing it as far as I did. The honest answer is no, but not for the reasons they expect. I don't regret it because of what happened to Connor. I regret it for George Farrow, who saved $22,000 to expand his shop and handed it to a man who spent it on restaurant dinners and a leased Tesla. George called me after the sentencing and thanked me, and I didn't know what to say because I hadn't done it for him, not at the start. I'd done it because my house was mine and I intended to keep it. The fact that it helped him felt less like justice and more like a reminder that these things are always bigger than they look from where you're standing. What I keep coming back to is the sequence. Connor didn't wake up one morning and decide to become someone who forges documents and steals from family. It happened in steps, small rationalizations that grew into larger ones. He got into financial trouble. He found someone, David Corte, who made the path feel lower than it was. Corte had done this 11 times before. He was very good at finding people at the edge of a decision and nudging them over. That's its own kind of predation, and I think about it more than I think about Connor's choices themselves. There's a principle I learned early in my career at the IRS. Financial crimes don't happen because people are purely evil. They happen because people convince themselves that the rules don't fully apply to their situation, that they're owed something, that the person on the other side won't really suffer, that it'll all work out eventually. The rationalization is always the same shape. Only the details change. Connor rationalized that I was old and wouldn't notice. He rationalized that the house was sitting there largely unused. He rationalized that Patricia would have wanted him taken care of. He rationalized until there was nothing left of the person I used to know, only the architecture of the lie he was living inside. I don't think intelligence protects you from that kind of self-deception. I think honesty does. The willingness to ask yourself the hard question, to sit with the uncomfortable answer, to act on it even when acting on it costs you something. That's harder than it sounds. Most people given a door marked rationalize this and everything gets easier will walk through it. The ones who don't aren't smarter. They've just made a practice of staying honest with themselves about what they're actually doing and why. The machinist's bench in my workshop is finished now. It took most of the winter. Every morning I walk past it, and I think about what it looked like when I bought it. 50 years of grime and 2 coats of paint hiding solid maple underneath. The work was slow and repetitive, and some days I didn't want to do it. But you don't get the wood back without removing what's covering it. There's no shortcut that doesn't damage the thing you're trying to restore. I think that's true of most things worth having. The house, the work, the clarity about who you are and what you won't allow. Connor is serving his sentence. Sandra is completing her community service hours. Somewhere in Nevada, David Corda is waiting for a trial date. And I'm here, in Flagstaff, with the ponderosa pines and the morning light and the finished bench, and everything that matters to me is exactly where it belongs.